The smell hits before anything else. Smoke, and underneath it, something worse. The smell of a city that has been starving for months, of bodies that have not been buried because no one has the strength left to dig. It is the ninth day of the Hebrew month of Av in the year 70. Inside the walls of Jerusalem, a woman presses herself into a doorway as soldiers run past her in the dark. And somewhere above her, on a hill she has looked at every day of her life, flames are climbing into the night sky. The temple, the house of God, the center of the entire Jewish world, is one day away from ceasing to exist. By this point in the siege, the historian Josephus tells us, people inside the city had been reduced to such desperation that mothers had taken food from their own children's mouths, and corpses lay uncollected in the streets because the living no longer had the strength to move them. Within 24 hours, fire will do what 4 years of war could not. It will end the Second Temple, and with it, a chapter of history that can never be reopened. Stay with this one, because what happens in the next 7 days reshaped a religion, a people, and an empire. And most of it comes to us from a man who watched it happen and lived to write it down. To understand how Jerusalem arrived at this point, you have to go back 4 years, to 66 AD, when Judea rose up against Rome. The reasons were layered: heavy taxation, brutal provincial governors, religious tensions between Jewish residents and Rome's pagan administration, and the deep, simmering resentment of foreign rule over a land its people considered sacred. The Second Temple sat at the heart of all of it. Rebuilt centuries earlier and expanded into a massive complex by Herod the Great, it was not simply a building. It was understood as the literal dwelling place of God on earth, the only site where the most sacred rituals of Judaism could be performed, and the gravitational center of Jewish identity. An attack on the temple was not just a military target. It was, in the eyes of those defending it, an attack on the relationship between a people and their God. Rome did not take the rebellion lightly. The general sent to crush it, Vespasian, fought a methodical campaign through Galilee and the Judean countryside, and when political chaos in Rome elevated him to emperor in 69 AD, command of the siege passed to his son, Titus. Titus arrived outside Jerusalem in the spring of 70 AD with 4 legions, tens of thousands of trained, disciplined soldiers, facing a city that should have been able to mount a unified defense. It could not. Jerusalem in this period was tearing itself apart from within. Several rival factions, led by men like John of Gischala and Simon Bar Giora, fought each other for control of the city even as Roman forces closed in from outside. And Josephus describes their infighting as having burned through food stores and weakened the city's defenses long before Rome's legions breached the walls. Granaries that might have fed the population for years were destroyed in factional fighting. By the time Rome's forces had fully encircled the city, Jerusalem was already wounded from within. What follows is the final stretch of a siege that had ground on for months, told through its last days. 7 days before the temple's destruction, Jerusalem is a city running on fumes. Roman siege engines have already breached the outer defenses, and Titus's legions now control significant portions of the city, including the area around the temple's outer courts. Inside what remains of Jewish-held territory, the famine described by Josephus has reached its most horrifying stage. People are eating leather, grass, anything that might pass as food. The defenders, though exhausted and outnumbered, refuse to surrender. For many, the temple itself is the line that cannot be crossed. As long as it stands, the war is not truly lost. 6 days out, fighting intensifies around the temple's outer walls. Roman soldiers attempt to advance through the porticos, covered walkways that surround the temple courts, and Jewish defenders, fighting with the desperation of people who have nothing left to lose, set fire to some of these structures themselves rather than let Rome control them. The flames here are deliberate, a defensive tactic, not yet the final catastrophe. If you're finding this hard to look away from, that's the point. What's coming in the next few days is even harder to watch, so stay with it. 5 days before the end, Titus reportedly attempts something unusual for a Roman commander in the middle of a siege. According to Josephus, he sends an associate, a Jewish man who Josephus himself had once known personally, to try to negotiate. Whether Titus genuinely hoped to spare the temple is something historians still debate. Josephus presents him as reluctant to destroy it, while some modern scholars view this as a flattering portrait written for a Roman audience. What is not in dispute is that the offer, whatever its sincerity, failed. The defenders inside refused to yield. 4 days out, Roman forces pushed deeper into the temple complex. Fighting rages through the inner courts. The defenders make a stand near the sanctuary itself, and according to Josephus, casualties mount sharply on both sides as the fighting compresses into smaller and smaller spaces. Civilians who had taken refuge inside the temple grounds, believing them the safest place left in the city, now find themselves trapped at the center of the fighting. 3 days before destruction, the violence reaches the inner sanctuary itself. Josephus describes Roman soldiers, despite reported orders to preserve the structure, becoming impossible to control in the chaos of close combat. This is the moment historians return to again and again, because what happens next will be debated for centuries. Was the burning an accident born from battlefield chaos, or something closer to inevitable given the scale of the fighting concentrated in one place? 2 days out, fire takes hold of parts of the temple complex. According to Josephus's account, a Roman soldier threw a burning torch into a chamber near the sanctuary, and once the flames caught, the dry wood and rich furnishings inside ensured they could not be controlled. Soldiers reportedly tried and failed to stop the blaze from spreading. Inside the city, word spreads fast. People who had endured years of war and months of starvation now watch the one thing they believed Rome would never truly destroy beginning to burn. 1 day before the end, on the 9th of Av in the year 70, the fire reaches its most devastating point. The flames spread through the sanctuary itself. Josephus describes the scene as one of almost incomprehensible chaos. Soldiers looting whatever they could reach, defenders fighting to the last in the burning courts, and the sound of the structure itself, centuries of construction and meaning, collapsing under the heat. By his account, the death toll inside the temple complex during these final hours was severe, with people trapped between fire, collapsing structures, and Roman soldiers who, in the heat of close combat, showed little restraint. And then, on the 10th of Av in the year 70, the Second Temple falls. The fire that began as scattered, chaotic blazes becomes total. The building that had stood in its rebuilt form for nearly 500 years and that represented for the Jewish people the central physical connection between heaven and earth is reduced to ruin in a matter of hours. Josephus writes that the flames could be seen from far outside the city, a column of fire and smoke marking the end of something that an entire civilization had built its identity around. What followed in the days after was the methodical Roman conquest of the rest of the city, and ultimately, the dismantling of much of Jerusalem itself. But it is this moment, the burning of the temple on the 9th of Av, that historians and the Jewish tradition itself mark as the true turning point, the day the ancient world's understanding of Jerusalem changed forever. The day is still observed today, thousands of years later, as one of the most solemn in the Jewish calendar, a measure of just how deep this wound went. We know almost everything about these 7 days because one man wrote it down, a former Jewish commander turned Roman chronicler, watching the destruction of his own people's holiest site and recording it for a world he knew would otherwise lose the details forever. Without his account, this week might have vanished into legend, distorted by time the way so much of the ancient world has been. Instead, we have something rarer, a near eyewitness record of the exact hours when one of history's most consequential buildings ceased to exist. And that woman in the doorway watching the flames climb into the sky over a city she had known her whole life, she had no way of knowing that the fire she was witnessing would still be remembered, studied, and mourned 2,000 years later. If this is the first time you've sat with these 7 days in this kind of detail, you understand now why this single week still echoes through history, and why it's worth coming back to.